Look, let's talk about Richard Nixon. Yes, Richard Nixon, the man whose legacy is a cocktail of paranoia, jowls, and a spectacular inability to operate a tape recorder without incriminating himself. But before he became a walking synonym for political scandal, he had a massive economic headache. Imagine your worst hangover, but instead of just a pounding head, you have a sluggish economy, rising unemployment, and inflation that's making your grocery bill look like a phone number. That was America in the early 1970s. The country was in a funk. The Vietnam War was a costly quagmire, and voters were getting grumpy. Nixon needed a win. He was staring down the barrel of the 1972 election, and a recession was not part of his re-election brochure. He needed the economy to look good, fast. The problem was, the usual economic medicine for inflation, raising interest rates to cool things down, would also slow the economy and potentially cost jobs. That's a political non-starter. It's like telling someone the only cure for their cold is to run a marathon in a blizzard. Nixon wanted the opposite. He wanted cheap, easy money. He wanted the economic equivalent of a sugar rush, a quick jolt to get things humming just long enough to get him past Election Day. So where does a president turn when he wants to juice the economy? He turns to the Federal Reserve, or the Fed. They control the master levers of the economy, specifically interest rates. Think of them as the nation's financial thermostat. If the economy is too hot, inflation, they can turn up the rates to cool it down. If it's too cold, recession, they can lower rates to warm it up. Nixon didn't just want the Fed to turn down the heat, he wanted them to crank the dial to tropical paradise, even if it meant risking a massive fire later. He needed a compliant Fed chairman who would do his bidding, and this is where things get dicey, because the Fed is supposed to be independent. They are meant to make tough decisions for the long-term health of the economy, far away from the grubby, short-term ambitions of politicians. Nixon, however, saw that independence less as a vital democratic safeguard, and more as an annoying obstacle. He wanted control. He wanted to pull the strings. So he appointed a man he thought he could control, Arthur Burns, as the new Fed chairman. It was a move that looked perfectly normal on the surface, but was in reality the beginning of a high-stakes gamble that would fundamentally reshape America's financial future and send shockwaves through the entire world. Okay, let's pause for a moment. What the hell is the Federal Reserve? It sounds like a boring government building where they store all the nation's paperclips. But it's infinitely more important, and frankly, weirder. The Fed is America's central bank. Its main job is to manage the country's money supply and keep prices stable. It's like the designated driver for the entire U.S. economy. When the economy has had a few too many drinks and is getting loud and inflationary, the Fed is supposed to take away the keys by raising interest rates. This makes borrowing money more expensive for everyone. Giant corporations, you buying a new refrigerator, which slows down spending and cools off inflation. Now the opposite is also true. If the economy is sleepy and slipping into a recession, the Fed can cut interest rates. This is like offering the economy a free cup of coffee and a donut. Money becomes cheaper to borrow, encouraging businesses to expand and people to spend. This is the gas pedal and brake pedal analogy you might have heard in school. Except in this case, the car is a multi-trillion-dollar economy, and the driver is a group of economists who speak in a language so dense it makes legal documents look like a Dr. Seuss book. Their goal is to achieve a magical balance: low unemployment, stable prices, a delicate dance that is incredibly difficult to get right. Low unemployment, stable prices, a delicate dance that is incredibly difficult to get right. But here is the crucial part, the detail that turns this from a boring economics lesson into a political thriller. The Fed is supposed to be independent. Its governors are appointed for long terms specifically to shield them from the whims of any one president or Congress. Why? Because politicians are obsessed with the short term. They have the attention span of a goldfish on espresso. An election is always just around the corner, and the right long-term economic decision, like raising rates to fight inflation, can cause short-term pain, like job losses. This independence is the bedrock of a stable financial system. It allows the central bank to make unpopular but necessary decisions without fearing they'll be fired by a president who's panicking about poll numbers. Enter Arthur Burns. With his pipe, thick glasses, and serious demeanor, he looked every bit the part of a wise, independent central banker. Nixon appointed him Fed chairman in 1970. Publicly, Nixon praised Burns's independence. But privately? Oh, it was a completely different story. Newly released White House tapes from that era. They paint a picture that is less statesmanly respect and more mob boss leaning on a shop owner. Nixon wanted one thing and one thing only: low interest rates to pump up the economy before the 1972 election. He didn't ask, he demanded. He made it clear Burns's future, and the Feds, depended on it. The pressure was relentless. Nixon and his aides would call Burns constantly. They threatened legislation to strip the Fed of its independence. They leaked stories to the press suggesting the Fed was incompetent and responsible for the country's economic woes. In one infamous recorded conversation, Nixon told his aides to give Burns the message: the Fed needed to open the money spigots, or else. It was a bare-knuckle political brawl. Nixon treated the chairman of the Federal Reserve like a disobedient underling, not the head of an independent institution. The message was clear: do what I want, or I will make your life a living hell. And what did Arthur Burns do? He caved. Under immense, unyielding pressure, the Fed kept interest rates artificially low through 1971 and into 1972, right on schedule for Nixon's re-election. The economy got its shot of adrenaline. Money was cheap, credit was flowing, the economic numbers started to look better. Nixon got the boom he wanted. He went on to win the 1972 election in a historic landslide. From a purely political perspective, the strategy was a resounding success. Nixon had gambled that he could bend the nation's central bank to his will, and he had won. But this was a victory with a terrifyingly high price tag. By forcing the Fed to pump money into an already inflationary economy, Nixon and Burns were essentially pouring gasoline on a smoldering fire. They had prioritized short-term political gain over long-term economic stability. The inflation that was already a problem was now supercharged, waiting to explode. While Nixon was busy twisting Arthur Burns's arm, another bigger problem was brewing. It involved gold. Yes, actual, shiny, heavy gold. For decades, the global financial system had operated under something called the Bretton Woods Agreement. Here's the simple version. The United States dollar was pegged to gold at a fixed price of $35 an ounce. Other countries then pegged their currencies to the dollar. This meant that, in theory, any country holding United States dollars could show up at America's doorstep and demand to trade them in for gold. The United States dollar was, quite literally, as good as gold. This system was the anchor of global finance. The problem was, America was printing way too many dollars. Thanks to spending on the Vietnam War and domestic programs plus the Fed's new easy money policy, the world was just flooded with greenbacks. Other countries, particularly in Europe, started looking at America's dwindling gold reserves in Fort Knox, and then at the mountain of dollars they were holding, and well, they did the math. They realized there were far more dollars out there than the United States had gold to back them up. They started getting nervous. Countries like France and Switzerland began showing up and asking for their gold, please and thank you. A bank run was starting, but on a global scale. Nixon was trapped. He could either raise interest rates dramatically to defend the dollar and attract foreign investment, plunging the United States into a deep recession right before an election, or he could watch as the nation's gold reserves drained away, triggering a global financial collapse. It was a choice between two disasters. So Nixon, ever the pragmatist, chose a third option. He decided to just change the rules of the game entirely. On August 15, 1971, he went on national television and announced a series of sweeping economic changes. The most important one was buried in the speech. He was temporarily suspending the convertibility of the dollar into gold. This was the Nixon shock. And that word, temporarily, was the biggest lie of all. It was permanent. In one fell swoop, Nixon unilaterally dismantled the entire post-World War II financial system. He slammed the gold window shut. The anchor was gone. The dollar was no longer tied to anything tangible. It was now a fiat currency, its value based on nothing more than faith in the United States government. For the first time in modern history, the world's entire financial system was floating freely, untethered from anything real. No one, not even Nixon's own advisors, knew what would happen next. The world held its breath. The immediate reaction to the Nixon shock was, to put it technically, complete and utter chaos. Financial markets went into a tailspin. The United States stock market initially soared, relieved that the government was doing something, but then it wobbled and crashed as the uncertainty set in. The value of the United States dollar, now floating freely, plummeted against other major currencies. Suddenly, American tourists in Europe found their money was worth a lot less. An American dollar that could buy you a nice lunch in Paris one week could barely buy you a croissant the next. The The world had entered a new, volatile era of floating exchange rates, but the most painful consequence was what happened back home. The combination of the Fed's easy money policy and the severing of the gold link sent inflation into the stratosphere. It was like a dam breaking. The 1970s became a decade of runaway prices. A gallon of gas, a loaf of bread. New car prices rose so fast that people's wages couldn't keep up. You could get a pay raise one month and feel poorer the next. It even led to the incredible shrinking candy bar. It was a slow-motion disaster that eroded savings and terrified consumers. This inflationary nightmare, which Nixon's policies directly fueled, haunted the American economy for a decade. It took another, much tougher Fed chairman, Paul Volcker, to finally break its back in the early 1980s by hiking interest rates to an eye-watering 20%, inducing a brutal recession to finally kill inflation. The pain was immense, but it re-established the Fed's credibility and its independence. The lesson was learned the hard way. When politicians meddle with the central bank for short-term gain, everyone pays the price in the long run. The Nixon boom of 1972 led directly to the stagflation bust for the rest of the decade. And this brings us to the big, lingering question that Nixon's gamble left us with. Should a president ever have this much power over the central bank? The argument for independence is clear. It protects our economy from the short-sighted, self-serving whims of politicians. But the counter-argument is that the Fed holds immense power over our lives, yet its leaders are unelected. Shouldn't the people we vote for have some say? Nixon's era serves as a stark, cautionary tale. It showed what happens when that line is crossed, when political pressure overrides economic prudence. So the next time you hear a politician attacking the Fed, remember the 1970s, remember the shrinking candy bars, and ask yourself, do you trust them with the keys to the economy? Question it. Learn more. Subscribe for more deep dives into the policies that move markets.